Clint Eastwood walked into the dealership, his boots clicking against the showroom floor. He took a slow look around, eyes scanning the rows of shiny new cars lined up under the bright fluorescent lights. He adjusted his worn leather jacket and tipped his hat slightly as he approached a cherry-red muscle car sitting in the center of the floor. Before he could even reach out to run his fingers along the polished hood, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, buddy, what do you think you're doing?" Eastwood turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on a man in a tailored navy blue suit. The name tag on his chest read Carl Dawson, manager. His arms were crossed, and his expression was one of mild irritation, like he'd just caught someone tracking mud into his pristine showroom. "I'm just looking," Eastwood said, his voice gravelly yet calm. Carl huffed, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, we don't just let anyone stroll in off the street and paw at the merchandise. These cars aren't for test driving unless you're serious about buying." Eastwood raised an eyebrow. "Did I say I wasn't serious?" Carl sighed, already exasperated. "Look, sir, I don't know if you're lost or just window shopping, but this isn't some roadside lot where you can kick tires all day. We cater to serious buyers here, people who actually have the means to make a purchase." A few salesmen across the floor chuckled, clearly entertained by their boss putting a supposed wanderer in his place. One of them muttered, "Looks like Grandpa's in the wrong place." Eastwood remained unfazed. He glanced back at the car, then looked Carl in the eyes. "And what makes you think I don't have the means?" Carl scoffed. "Come on, pal, you're dressed like you just stepped out of a Western. No offense, but our clientele usually walks in wearing Rolexes, not cowboy boots." For a long moment, Eastwood said nothing. He simply stared at Carl, his expression unreadable. The silence grew uncomfortable, and a few of the younger salesmen shifted awkwardly. Then with a slow nod, Eastwood exhaled. "Well, that's a shame, because I was planning on buying this dealership today." Carl blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Eastwood said, slipping a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handing it over. Carl hesitated before taking it. As his eyes scanned the document, the color drained from his face. It was an official purchase agreement. The dealership had been bought, and the new owner was Clint Eastwood himself. Carl stammered. This must be a joke." Eastwood shook his head. "No joke. As of noon today, I own this place. Just thought I'd come in and see how things were running before I made my presence known." The entire showroom fell silent. Every salesman, every customer, everyone was staring. The laughter from before had disappeared, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Carl swallowed hard. "Mr. Eastwood, I didn't realize—" Eastwood smirked. "No, I don't suppose you did. You were too busy judging a book by its cover." Carl opened his mouth, but no words came out. Eastwood turned to the rest of the staff. "I like straight shooters, but I don't like people who turn away good business because of how someone looks. This dealership is under new management now, and things are about to change." The salesmen exchanged nervous glances, some adjusting their ties, others straightening their posture. Carl forced an uneasy chuckle. "Listen, Mr. Eastwood, it was just a misunderstanding. I can assure you we treat all our customers with the utmost—" Eastwood raised a hand, cutting him off. "Save it. I'm not here for excuses." Carl cleared his throat. "So, what now?" Eastwood glanced back at the car he had been admiring earlier. "Well, first things first, I'll be taking this one. Cash." Carl nodded furiously. "Absolutely. Mr. Eastwood, right away, sir." Eastwood turned back to the rest of the dealership. "And after that, we're going to make sure no customer ever gets turned away just because they don't look like they can afford a car. Because that's not how I run things." A murmur of approval swept through the staff. Some of them, especially the newer hires, looked relieved. Carl, on the other hand, stood rigid, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He knew his days of running the place were numbered. Eastwood shot him one final glance. "Oh, and Carl?" Carl straightened. "Yes, sir?" "You're fired." Carl's mouth dropped open. Before he could protest, Eastwood turned on his heel, pulling out his checkbook as he walked toward the front desk. The other salesmen watched in stunned silence before one of them, a younger guy near the back, muttered, "Well, guess we won't be laughing at customers anymore." And just like that, Clint Eastwood had not only bought a dealership, but had also delivered a lesson no one would soon forget. Carl stood there frozen, his mind scrambling for a way out. "Wait, Mr. Eastwood, please. I've been running this place for years. I know every number, every client, every—" Eastwood didn't even turn around. "And yet you don't know how to treat people right. That's the only number that matters to me." Carl looked around desperately, hoping someone would back him up, but his own sales team avoided his gaze. Nobody wanted to stick their neck out for him. "You can't be serious," Carl muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Eastwood finally stopped and turned back, his expression unreadable. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Carl swallowed. He had seen that look before, on the big screen. That signature Eastwood stare, the kind that made outlaws rethink their choices in old westerns. Only this time, it was real. A heavy silence hung in the air. Then, Eastwood walked up to a younger salesman nearby. "What's your name, kid?" The young man, barely out of his 20s, straightened his tie. Jake, sir." Eastwood nodded. "Jake, how long you been working here?" "Almost a year." "You like the way things are run here?" Jake hesitated, glancing at Carl before answering. "Well, to be honest, sir, I've seen a lot of people get turned away just because they didn't look like they could afford a car." Carl's jaw clenched. "Jake, you little—" Eastwood shot him a sharp glance, silencing him. Then he turned back to Jake. "And if you were running this place, would you do things differently?" Jake blinked. "Me? Running it?" Eastwood shrugged. "Somebody's got to step up. And I like people who believe in fairness." Jake's eyes widened. The other salesmen exchanged looks. Was this really happening? Carl took a step forward, shaking his head. "Wait, you can't just—" Eastwood cut him off. "I can, and I am." He turned back to Jake. "You willing to take on more responsibility?" Jake hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yes, sir. Absolutely." Eastwood smiled slightly. "Good. You're the new sales manager." Carl's face turned red. "You're replacing me with him? A kid who's barely been here a year?" Eastwood's voice was calm but firm. "I'm replacing you with someone who doesn't judge customers based on their boots." Carl's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked around the dealership, but there was no sympathy to be found. Even the receptionist at the front desk was avoiding eye contact. Finally, with a defeated sigh, Carl took off his name tag and tossed it on the counter. "Fine, but don't come crawling back when this place tanks." Eastwood smirked. "The only thing that was tanking this place was you." Carl stormed past him, muttering curses under his breath as he shoved open the glass doors and disappeared into the parking lot. The room remained silent for a few moments. Then, slowly, people began to murmur, whispering about what had just happened. Eastwood turned to the rest of the staff. "All right, folks, here's the deal. We're going to make some changes around here. Starting now, every customer gets treated with respect. Whether they're in a three-piece suit or a flannel shirt, we give them the same service. You never know who's walking through that door." A few of the older salesmen nodded, looking sheepish. Jake, still in shock, squared his shoulders, realizing this was real. "And one more thing," Eastwood added, patting the red muscle car on the hood. "First person who sells me this car gets a bonus." Jake grinned. "I'll grab the paperwork right now, sir." Eastwood chuckled. "That's what I like to hear." As Jake rushed off, the rest of the dealership buzzed with excitement. The legendary Clint Eastwood had just taken over, and things were about to change in a big way. As Jake rushed off to grab the paperwork, the energy in the dealership shifted. The tension that had filled the room just moments ago seemed to dissolve, replaced by an unspoken sense of opportunity. One of the older salesmen, Greg, stepped forward, clearing his throat. Mr. Eastwood? Eastwood turned, giving him a nod. Yeah? Greg hesitated for a second, then gestured toward the red muscle car. If you don't mind me asking, why this car? I mean, you could afford any car, even something a lot fancier. Small smile tugged at the corner of Eastwood's lips. He ran a hand over the hood, almost as if he were reminiscing. This car reminds me of my first real ride. A machine with some muscle, some heart. Back then, you didn't need a computer screen to tell you how to drive. It was just you, the road, and your instincts. Greg nodded, clearly understanding. They don't make them like they used to. Eastwood chuckled. No, they don't. Then he looked up, scanning the dealership floor. But you know what they can make? A dealership that treats people right, and that's what we're gonna do here. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. At that moment, Jake returned, holding a folder with the sales contract. Got everything. Right here, Mr. Eastwood, he said, his excitement barely contained. Eastwood took the paperwork, flipping through it with a practiced ease. Good work, Jake. As he pulled a pen from his jacket pocket, the glass doors to the dealership swung, open again. A man in a crisp black suit walked in, looking around with a confused expression. He had the air of someone important. Excuse me, the man said, walking toward the front desk. I'm looking for Carl Dawson. He was supposed to be here, to meet me about finalizing the dealership's sale. Before anyone else could speak, Eastwood answered without looking up from the contract. Carl's gone. Dealership's already been bought. The man furrowed his brow. Wait. What? Jake stepped forward, smirking. Sir, you're looking at the new owner, Clint Eastwood. The man's eyes widened, looking at Eastwood in shock. You bought the place? Eastwood finished signing the last page and handed the paperwork back to Jake. Then he looked at the man and gave him a signature Eastwood smirk. That's right. The man blinked, speechless. Then, realizing he was standing in the presence of a Hollywood legend, he quickly extended a hand. Wow, it's an honor, sir. I'm Michael Stevenson from the corporate office. Eastwood shook his hand. Pleasure. Michael cleared his throat. Well, I have to say this is unexpected. Carl had been negotiating with us for months. I assume you'll be reviewing the dealership's operations and making adjustments? Eastwood nodded. That's right. And the first adjustment's already been made. New sales manager, new attitude, and from now on every customer gets treated with respect. No exceptions. Michael smiled. Well, I have to admit, that sounds like a step in the right direction. Eastwood patted the red muscle car's roof. It is, and it's just the beginning. Michael nodded. Well then, Mr. Eastwood, welcome to the business. If you need anything from corporate, just let us know. As Michael left, Eastwood turned back to Jake and the rest of the staff. All right, folks, let's get to work. We've got a dealership to run, and a reputation to fix. Jake grinned, holding up the signed paperwork for the car. And we've got our first sale under new ownership. The staff cheered, and just like that, Clint Eastwood had done more than buy a dealership. He had changed its entire future.